Hello fellow fans of the pony kind, Mage speaking and I'm back. Sorry it took me so long, but here I am. So without further ado, let's cut right to the cheese. AppleBuck season is probably one of the episodes from the first season I like a whole lot. I'm sure not many remember that this episode spawned quite a few memorable scenes, such as Pinky's Big Bad's line, Applejack's swirly eyes gif, the woo-woo of Pinky, and the oohing at the trophy scene. This was also the first time we see Big Mac, and his ever-popular yup. Derby saying muffins, and the most known of all, Rainbow Dash's so awesome line, as well as the facial expression. Despite all these popular moments and my personal fondness of it, I actually think this episode has a lot of flaws to it. This episode is still suffering the same flaw all the previous episodes did. The show does this formula where one pony is the main focus, then she meets the other ponies scene by scene, echoing the structure that Lauren had presented in her previous work. It's not a huge drawback, but it's getting redundant. It makes the whole episode seem unnatural, staged even. It jumps from scene to scene, like every scene was a different part of the stage. We do not see the ponies walk from A to B themselves, we just cut from A to B. It slightly messes with the pacing, and we can't really tell the time that has passed within the episode. Here's what I mean. We start off with a scene of AJ and Big Mac talking, giving some exposition about the cause of the central conflict in the episode. Then we get the opening, after which we start with a random stampede. AJ saves everyone, so they decide to throw her a party. Suddenly it's 1 week later and ponies are decorating the town. The jump is so sudden that if it wasn't for Pinky, out of all the ponies, mentioning that it's been a week, we'd assume that the ponies decorated the town within one afternoon. Moments later we see a tired AJ going up on the stage. If we hadn't seen the exposition in the beginning and missed Pinky's mentioning it was a week later, the scene would be very confusing. One moment she's corralling the cows, and the next she's struggling to remain conscious enough to blur out a thank you. And the following scenes after, we were not informed of the time span this time, so one would assume that everything that happened next happened on the same day, which makes no sense. And that's just the beginning of the flaws. Let's rewind back. Firstly, the stampede. In itself, the stampede is a very odd occurrence. Know why? Because cows can talk. Had they made cows just a bunch of silly animals that act on instinct, it would have been fine, but they made cows talk. They gave them the ability to think rationally. We tend to link sentience to rationality, so I am forced to question the scene more than I would have had the animals been stupid. These cows were fully capable of comprehending the fact that they have ran far enough from the snake and any further running will endanger an entire town's population. I understand that panic can cause irrationality, but we can assume that the cows have been running for a rather long period of time and a large distance, surely enough to get away from the initial threat. If there is any visual indication where the stampede should draw to a halt, it would be pony-made structures. At the very least, it's a visual indication to the cows that they have traveled a great distance and should trigger a stop function somewhere in their minds. I would not expect them to be reasonable had they been portrayed as common cattle, but they were not, making the scene nothing short of confusing. Moving on. The whole town is throwing a party for AJ for saving them. Am I the only one bothered by this notion? They decorated the entire town just for this, and they gave AJ a giant trophy? Why a trophy? Such a huge one too. Why not a ribbon or a medal, a gilded horseshoe or something? Was being saved from a stampede really that big of an honor? Later we see Ponyville getting saved from numerous other threats, yet no parties nor trophies. It just feels a little forced. I suppose the trophy was there for a few gags, such as the oohing scene and the scene of AJ dragging the trophy, where everyone was quiet and you just listened to the awkward dragging noise, making the trophy seem less of a prize and more of a burden. I suppose the scene could work as a metaphor if you really wanted it to become one. Something along the lines of AJ starting the episode with great pride in herself, but later on the pride weighs her down, becoming a burden. Much like the giant trophy, a symbol of honor and something you should take pride in, but it is heavy and AJ drags the burden of a trophy all alone while all her friends stare and do nothing to help her. The AJ helping her friends scenes have problems too. All three friends do not notice AJ's odd behavior. Pinky just watches AJ put in the wrong ingredients. Fluttershy cares more about the bunnies and not AJ's well-being. The biggest problem I had though was the Rainbow Dash scene. Rainbow showed zero concern for AJ after she missed the ramp several times, hitting the ground with force. I know this was slapstick, but slapstick to this degree does not work in the universe where characters do get hurt and can break bones. In addition, you'd think they'd realize this was a bad idea from the start. Even if she did land on the ramp, wood is not cushioned and it hit the ground, causing pain. Again, you might attribute this to the show being young at the time and unsure of what direction to take, but that excuse is not an infinite get-out-of-jail-free card. In the episode where one pony is concerned about a friend being reckless, causing harm to herself and others, you do not portray another friend showing gross neglectfulness towards said same friend. You cannot excuse Rainbow for making AG put herself in constant severe harm. This goes beyond Rainbow being self-centered. She's portrayed as downright cruel. She doesn't care if AG is hurt after several painful landings and then questions her skills because AG keeps missing. The saddest part is, Rainbow didn't even need AJ there. She needed the heaviest pony in town, not the best athlete. Sure, AJ probably has a lot of muscle, which weighs more than fat, but there has to be at least one pony heavier than AJ. Big Mac would be a choice, if he wasn't hurt. AJ spared no harm in this episode, the only limit being the fact that this cartoon is targeted at a young audience. Most of it is played for laughs, but as mentioned before, such severe and constant slapstick has no place in a world that should function much like our own. As a whole, this episode was messy and clunky, still unsure of which direction to take with its content. I suppose I really didn't paint a pretty picture of the episode, despite saying previously that I liked it. Well, the episode definitely has its redeeming points. My personal favorite is the opening scene where Big Mac talks. Hearing him speak full sentences warms my heart because this was before the day where he was made into a one-joke character. You get a bit of insight to the kind of personality he has. He seems the calm, wise type that doesn't waste breath for unneeded chatter. He actually started off with a personality of some sort, and it saddens me that he no longer gets any speaking roles beyond yup and nope. The episode's main focus is AG, of course, and we are treated to a previously unseen personality trait of hers, stubbornness. Even though it wasn't the brightest decision to make, you have to give credit to AG for doing her best in trying to do her work and still trying to find the time to help her friends. You see her as a prideful, stubborn, but a hard-working and dependable pony. She could have easily declined to offer her help, and she had a good reason to, but she did not and tried her best despite screwing up horribly. Sadly, no sooner are we introduced to her trait than being given a resolution, overcoming her trait. Sure, AJ is portrayed as stubborn later on, but at this point all we knew was that AJ had a problem with being stubborn, but then she learns not to be so. She's given a trait only for it to be removed, not telling us if it will be given back or if this was just a one-shot sort of deal. The portrayal of her sleepiness was something I can only assume a larger part of the older audience could relate to, me included. Her actions while sleepy, like shaking her head to stay awake, senses dulling down, and her nodding off the minute she stopped moving, was an accurate portrayal of how I personally act while I'm exhausted. I cannot speak for all, but for me personally, it was really easy to put myself in her shoes and understand the difficulty of the task laid before her, despite them being exaggerated for comedy's sake. Most fans love this episode because they say that this was a good AJ episode, but I believe it was just a very relatable episode. Even if he had never been exhausted to the extent that AJ was, I'm sure many fans have dealt with the situation where they were too tired to finish a project and maybe even had to juggle between two or more, none of which they were willing to give up on despite them being too much. Biting off more than we can chew is a thing I and most of my friends do, so this episode, although very clunky, spoke to us on a personal level. You can have a beautiful show with stunning visuals and flawless story, but if you cannot make the audience connect to the characters, then those elements will not matter. The audience has to relate, understand, and sympathize to the actions, motives, and current state of at least one of the characters to fully enjoy the show, and Friendship is Magic, not just this episode alone, does this really well. I suppose I've said my piece about this episode, so now it's theory time! This time it's a rather silly one, but bear with me. Now, what if the cows were not stampeding out of fright, but were actually brainwashed to stampede and cause havoc in town? Look at their eyes in this screenshot. Don't they look so blank? Empty? Now look at them here when AG comes in. See the difference? I'm guessing they snapped out of whatever trance they were in when AG ran up to them, but they continued running because they are herd animals. So long as everyone else was running, so would they. I'm sure they didn't even realize there was a town nearby. The show is not short on creatures who'd wish harm onto the ponies, so it's not entirely unbelievable that some sort of force decided to mess with them. In short, there was no snake. Dun dun dun! That's it for this time. Thank you for watching. Mage out.